Welcome to Midnight Grove, where quiet stories unfold gently, and the weight of unspoken thoughts fades with every word. Tonight's tale is The Library of Unsent Letters, a reflective journey through forgotten corners of the heart. Elena stumbles upon a hidden library, but its shelves hold no books, only letters. Letters never sent, words never spoken, thoughts left behind. Among them she finds letters written in her own handwriting, ones she doesn't recall writing, yet knows are hers. As she explores, she's faced with a choice: to leave the words unsent forever, or finally release what she's been carrying all along. So settle in, take a deep breath, and let the story unfold quietly around you. The Library of Unsent Letters. Chapter 1. The Door in the Alleyway. Elena hadn't meant to find the alley. In fact, she had walked this part of town countless times before, always sticking to the familiar main streets, her route precise, predictable. But that evening something felt different. The city was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles just after rain. Puddles reflected the soft glow of street lamps, and the faint scent of damp stone lingered in the air. She should have gone straight home. But without thinking, her feet slowed at the corner. And for reasons she couldn't quite name, she turned down an alley she didn't remember noticing before. The alley was narrow, cobblestone underfoot, flanked by buildings with peeling paint and faded window panes. Halfway down she paused. A door stood slightly ajar on her left. Simple wooden, its paint worn away by time. Above it a small sign hung crookedly, the lettering so faint she almost missed it. Library of Unsent Letters. Elena blinked. She glanced up and down the alley. No other signs, no explanation. Just the door, waiting. Something inside her hesitated. Maybe she should turn back. But curiosity, quiet, persistent, nudged her forward. She reached out and pushed the door open. A soft chime echoed as she stepped inside. The scent of old paper and something faintly floral met her immediately. Lavender, maybe, mingled with something deeper. The space was dimly lit, warm. Rows upon rows of shelves stretched far beyond what seemed possible from the outside. Each shelf was carefully labeled, but instead of titles or genres, the tags read things like unspoken apologies, what could have been, letters to the ones who left. Elena's footsteps echoed softly as she moved deeper. There was no one else in sight, only the quiet hum of the room and the weight of the letters resting on the shelves. At the far end she noticed a small desk. Behind it sat an elderly woman, her posture straight, her expression calm. The woman looked up as Elena approached, offering a gentle smile. "Welcome," she said simply. Elena hesitated. "This is a library?" The woman nodded. "Of a sort. It holds the words people never sent." She gestured lightly toward the shelves. Letters written but never delivered. Thoughts never spoken aloud. Elena glanced around. Each shelf seemed to hum softly with the weight of things left unsaid. "Anyone can come in?" she asked. The woman's smile remained. "Only those who need to." She tilted her head slightly. "And when they're ready, They find what they're looking for. Aiku. Elena swallowed. She wasn't sure what had brought her here, but something about the stillness of the place made her stay. Her eyes wandered to a nearby shelf marked "Letters Never Written." Carefully, she reached out and pulled one envelope free. It was sealed, the paper soft to the touch. No recipient marked on the front. Aiku. She turned it over, unsure why her hands trembled slightly. With a glance toward the librarian, who gave a faint nod, she broke the seal. Inside, neat handwriting curved across the page. The words were simple. A letter filled with apologies, regrets. A conversation left unfinished. It wasn't addressed. But something about the phrasing, the tone, felt achingly familiar. Aiku. She moved down the row. Curious now. Another envelope. Then another. Each one different. Some long and winding, filled with details. Others short, only a few lines, but all carried the same feeling. Things people never said. Aiku. As she neared the end of the shelf, her fingers brushed against a plain, unmarked envelope. She hesitated. The paper was thicker than the others, slightly worn. She slipped it free and carefully unfolded it. Her breath caught. Aiku. It was written in her own handwriting. Elena stared at the page, heart thudding softly. There was no mistaking it. The loops of the letters, the slight slant of the handwriting. It was hers. But she couldn't remember ever writing this letter. She scanned the first few lines, her eyes moving faster now. It wasn't addressed by name, but the contents made her chest tighten. A letter to someone she hadn't thought about in years, someone she'd walked away from, without saying everything she had meant to. The words on the page were simple, nothing dramatic, nothing overly poetic. Just thoughts she had once carried. Quiet feelings folded away and left unsent.
Things like,
I wish I'd told you how much that moment meant to me. I never explained why I left so abruptly. There are things I should have said, but didn't know how to at the time. Each line felt like peeling back a layer she hadn't realized she'd built around herself. She finished reading and stood still for a long moment, the weight of the letter settling over her. Finally, she glanced back toward the desk. The librarian met her gaze, expression soft. Sometimes, the woman said gently, we write things we're not ready to send. Elena swallowed. But I don't remember writing this. The librarian tilted her head. Some letters don't need pen and paper to be written. She gestured toward the shelves. They live inside us. This place simply gives them a home. Aiku. Elena traced the edge of the envelope, her mind whirling. It felt strange, holding words she hadn't consciously put to paper, yet knowing deep down they were undeniably hers. She looked around the room, the shelves stretching quietly into shadow. Do people never send them? She asked softly. The librarian's smile was faint. Some do. Some leave them here. Some simply need to read them, and then let them go. Aiku. Elena nodded, her fingers curling lightly around the letter. A quiet hum lingered in her chest, not heavy, but noticeable. Something unsettled. now slightly more at peace. Aiku. She glanced once more at the shelves, wondering what other letters might be waiting there. What other words she might have left unsaid. Aiku. The librarian's voice reached her one last time as she turned toward the door. Come back when you're ready. The library always keeps them safe. Aiku. Elena stepped outside into the cool night air. The alley behind her seemed almost faded, as if it might disappear once she turned the corner. She tucked the letter carefully into her coat pocket and walked home, the quiet weight of unsent words resting gently at her side. Chapter 2: The Letters Left Unwritten. The next day, Elena found herself distracted. She moved through her routine, coffee in the morning, answering emails, walking to work. But her mind kept circling back to the library, to the shelves stretching quietly into shadow, to the envelope she had tucked carefully in her coat pocket. She hadn't opened it again. It remained there, folded, the paper still carrying the faint scent of lavender and old ink. Aiku. By evening she couldn't resist. Instead of walking straight home, she retraced her steps, searching for the narrow alley. For a moment, she worried it might not be there. Maybe it had been a trick of her mind, a strange dream brought on by exhaustion. But when she turned the familiar corner, there it was, tucked between the quiet buildings, the door still slightly ajar. The crooked sign overhead still whispered its name. Library of Unsent Letters. She stepped inside. The soft chime greeted her once more. The scent of paper, lavender, something older. The librarian sat behind the desk, looking up as if she had expected her. Welcome back, the woman said softly. Elena offered a small, almost sheepish smile. I wasn't sure I'd find it again. The librarian's smile never wavered. The library appears when it's needed. Elena glanced around. The rows of shelves felt familiar now, their quiet presence like a gentle hum beneath the air. But something else tugged at her attention. The envelope still in her pocket. She approached the desk, carefully pulling it free. I found this yesterday, she said, voice low. I don't remember writing it. The librarian nodded, unsurprised. Letters can live inside us long before we put them to paper. She gestured lightly toward the shelves. Some people come here searching for the letters they never dared to write. Aiku. Elena traced her fingers along the envelope's edge. There are more? She asked quietly. The librarian's gaze softened. If you're ready to find them. Aiku. She wandered the rows slowly this time, pausing at each label. Unspoken apologies. What could have been? Letters to the ones who left. Her hand hovered over a shelf marked, Things Left Unsaid. Something in her chest tugged. She reached out, sliding one envelope free. Aiku. The handwriting wasn't hers, but as she unfolded it, the words felt familiar. A letter addressed not to a specific person, but to you. It spoke of moments missed. Times when silence felt safer than honesty. Times when the right words came too late. It wasn't accusatory. It wasn't bitter. Just honest. Aiku. She read the letter twice before gently refolding it. carefully returning it to its place. Aiku. Further down the row, another envelope caught her eye. This one was in her handwriting. She slid it free, heart beating faster. The opening lines startled her. A letter addressed to someone she hadn't thought about in years. Someone she had once considered a close friend. Before time and distance and miscommunication quietly pulled them apart. The letter spoke of things she had never said aloud. I didn't know how to tell you I was struggling. I should have reached out sooner. I wish I had listened better. Elena stood still for a long moment after finishing. The words felt heavy, but also lighter somehow. Not accusatory, not desperate. Simply real. She glanced back toward the librarian. Can I send them? Her voice was hesitant. The librarian's eyes remained calm. Some letters are meant to be delivered. Others simply need to be read. She folded her hands neatly. It's always your choice. Elena nodded slowly. Her fingers tightened around the envelope, then gently slid it back onto the shelf. Aiku. She wandered further. One row was marked, Letters to Ourselves. The label made her pause. Carefully, she drew one envelope free. Inside was a single sentence. You did the best you could. Her breath caught. She folded the letter quietly, placing it back without a word. As she neared the end of the shelves, another small section stood apart. The label read, Letters Left Unwritten. These envelopes were unsealed, blank, waiting. Aiku. She turned back to the librarian, curious. What are these for? The woman smiled softly. For when you're ready to write your own. She gestured gently to a small desk tucked in the corner, a pen resting beside a stack of blank pages. Elena hesitated. Her fingers brushed over one of the blank envelopes. For the first time, she wondered what letter she might write, if given the chance. Not for anyone else, but for herself. Aiku. The librarian spoke one final time, voice soft. There's no rush. The letters will be here when you're ready. Aiku. Elena nodded faintly, the hum of the library settling gently around her. And as she stepped back into the quiet night, she felt the weight of unsaid things grow a little lighter. Chapter 3, The Letter She Never Sent. It was a week before Elena returned. She hadn't planned on staying away that long, but life, as it often did, filled quickly. Work, deadlines, errands, small distractions stacking neatly. And yet, in quiet moments, on the train ride home, while washing dishes, as she lay awake at night, her thoughts always wandered back to the library, to the quiet rows, the weight of letters unread, the blank pages waiting. Aiku. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the air took on that early hint of autumn, she made her way back. The alley was just as she left it. The crooked sign swayed gently above the door. The warm scent of old paper greeted her as she stepped inside, the soft chime overhead echoing faintly. Aiku. The librarian looked up, her smile unchanged. Welcome back. Elena nodded softly, her steps instinctively leading her down the familiar rows. She moved slower this time, less hesitant. Her fingers trailed lightly along the shelves, reading the quiet labels as though they were titles in a well-loved book. Things left unsaid, letters to the ones who left, and finally, one she hadn't noticed before. Letters we regret not sending. Her hand hovered there. Something in her chest tightened. Recognition, maybe, or something heavier. Carefully, she slid an envelope free. The envelope felt heavier somehow. Though thin, it seemed to carry more weight than the others she'd touched. Elena unfolded it gently, heart steady but expectant. The handwriting inside was unmistakable. Hers. But unlike the others, this letter was longer. Pages carefully written, deliberate. No recipient marked by name. But as she began reading, she immediately knew who it was meant for. Aiku. It was addressed to someone she hadn't thought about in years. Or rather, someone she had tried not to think about. An old friend. A relationship that had unraveled quietly. Not through one grand moment, but through small silences, misunderstandings left unchecked. The letter didn't accuse. It didn't plead. It simply spoke of how she had felt, of the conversations she'd wanted to have, but never found the right words for, of the things left unsaid, until the distance between them grew too wide. Aiku. She stood still for a long time after reading, the paper soft between her hands. Her chest felt heavy, but not unbearable. There was something honest in holding the letter now, as if part of her had finally caught up to where she had left herself all those years ago. Aiku. She glanced toward the front desk. The librarian met her gaze, eyes calm, knowing. Aiku. Can I send this one? Elena's voice was quieter than she expected. The librarian didn't hesitate. You can. She folded her hands. But whether it's meant to reach them, or simply to leave your own hands, is up to you. Aiku. Elena looked down at the envelope again. There was a small writing desk tucked near the corner, a set of blank papers resting beside a fountain pen. Her fingers traced the edges of the letter once more. And then, slowly, she moved toward the desk. Aiku. She sat. For a moment, she simply breathed. The weight of the letter in her lap, the soft hum of the library settling around her. She unfolded the pages, reading them again, each word steady and familiar now. Then she picked up the pen. Aiku. She didn't rewrite the letter. Instead, she added one final line, a quiet closing, not for the recipient, but for herself. Aiku. You don't have to carry this anymore. Aiku. She sealed the envelope carefully, placing it in the small tray labeled for sending. The librarian approached silently. Her smile was gentle as she took the letter, tucking it into a slot behind the desk. It will find its place, she said softly. Aiku. Elena nodded, something loosening inside her chest. For years, she hadn't known how to let go of that moment. But here, among these quiet shelves, she realized Sometimes it wasn't about the letter being read. It was about allowing yourself to finally put the words down. Haiku. She wandered the shelves once more, fingertips grazing lightly across the spines of unsent thoughts, unfinished conversations, and as she reached the section marked Letters to Ourselves, she paused. Her hand hovered above the envelopes labeled Letters to Ourselves. She had passed by this section before, reading one or two short lines, never staying long. But now, with the weight of the letter she had just released still fresh, she felt something stir. Carefully, she drew one envelope free. The handwriting wasn't hers, but the words inside felt like they could have been. Simple, direct. You are not responsible for what others leave unsaid. Haiku. She folded it slowly, placing it back. Her eyes drifted to the next shelf over. Letters never written. The envelopes here were blank, waiting. Haiku. She stood for a long moment, debating. And then she sat again at the small writing desk. Haiku. The librarian didn't approach this time. She simply remained behind the front desk, offering no instructions, no expectation. Elena picked up a fresh sheet of paper. She tapped the pen lightly against its edge, and without forcing the words, without planning, she began to write. It wasn't addressed to anyone in particular. There was no formal greeting, no structured closing. Just a quiet stream of thoughts, words she hadn't realized had been sitting beneath the surface. She wrote about the things she had left undone, the moments she had avoided. But also, she wrote about how far she had come, about the small, steady ways she had changed, about the strength it took to sit here now, finally willing to face the unsaid. Haiku. By the time she finished, she felt lighter. She folded the letter gently, slipped it into one of the blank envelopes. There was no need to place it on the shelves. No need to leave it for anyone else. She tucked it into her coat pocket, a quiet reminder she would carry herself. Haiku. As she stood to leave, the librarian's voice met her softly. The letters we keep can weigh as much as the ones we send. Elena nodded faintly, offering the woman a small smile. And as she stepped back into the cool night air, the weight in her chest felt lighter than it had in years. Chapter 4. The quiet closing of the library. Days passed before Elena returned, but unlike before, there was no hesitation, no restless pacing, no indecision. Life outside moved on as usual, but within her, something felt quieter, calmer, like a conversation she'd been avoiding had finally caught up, and now sat beside her, silent but no longer demanding. Haiku. It was evening when she reached the alley. The city had begun settling in for the night, lights flickering on, the streets thinning of people. The door stood slightly ajar. Just as always, the crooked sign above her head swayed gently in the breeze. Library of Unsent Letters. Haiku. Inside, the familiar scent greeted her. Old paper, lavender, something faintly floral, but older, like the memory of ink drying slowly on parchment. The soft chime echoed above as she stepped in. The librarian glanced up from behind the desk, offering the same serene smile. "Welcome back." "Aiku." Elena nodded, her gaze wandering over the shelves. She moved slower now, not searching, just present. Her fingers grazed the labels she knew by heart. Things left unsaid, letters to the ones who left, letters we regret not sending. She paused by the section marked Letters to Ourselves and smiled. But today, she didn't reach for an envelope. Instead, she made her way quietly toward the small desk in the corner, the same one where blank pages always waited. She sat, feeling the steady hum of the room settle around her. The librarian didn't approach, though Elena caught the faintest glance in her direction, a knowing softness in her eyes. "Aiku." She picked up a sheet of paper. The pen beside it felt familiar now. Her hand hovered over the blank page, and slowly, without overthinking, she began to write. This letter wasn't addressed to anyone specific. It wasn't filled with apologies or explanations. There was no urgency to it. Instead, she wrote as though she were speaking softly to herself, to the version of herself who had first stepped into the library. Tired, restless, carrying the quiet weight of words unspoken. Aiku. She wrote about the moments she had once avoided, the conversations she'd been too afraid to start, the regrets she had folded neatly and tucked away, like old photographs she no longer looked at. And then she wrote about how it felt to let them go. Aiku. The words flowed gently, not rushed. By the time she set the pen down, the paper was filled. She folded the letter carefully, slipping it into one of the blank envelopes. She didn't place it on the shelf, didn't leave it behind. She tucked it into her coat pocket, knowing exactly where it belonged. Aiku. She stood, taking one final glance around the library. The rows of shelves stretched quietly into shadow, just as they always had. But something felt different now, lighter. Not because the letters had disappeared, but because she no longer felt afraid to read them. Aiku. As she approached the front desk, the librarian looked up once more. There was no need for words between them. Instead, the woman offered a faint nod, eyes kind. Aiku. Elena reached the door, her hand resting briefly on its edge. She turned back one last time. Aiku. The library remained still, the soft scent of paper and lavender filling the space like a quiet breath. And as she stepped outside, she realized the library had never been about sending the letters. It was about allowing yourself to finally write them. Aiku. The cool night air met her gently. The sounds of the city drifted softly around her, not intrusive, but distant. Her coat pocket felt slightly heavier, the envelope resting safely inside. But inside her chest, she felt lighter than she had in a long, long time. Aiku. The alley behind her faded quietly as she turned the corner. No sign, no door. But she knew it would always be there, waiting when she needed it. Aiku. And as she walked home, the unsent letter at her side, she smiled. Thank you for joining us tonight at Midnight Grove for the Library of Unsent Letters. Elena thought she had long since moved past the things she left unsaid. But sometimes the words we never speak remain folded quietly inside us, waiting not to be delivered, but to be acknowledged. As you drift into sleep, remember, the act of letting go doesn't always require anyone else's eyes. Sometimes it's enough simply to write the letter and know you no longer need to carry it. Sleep well, and we'll see you next time for another story.